Thank you. Thank you. My name is Greg Chick. I'm a plumbing contractor. I would like to say that when I take the things that I learn at these meetings and all the books and all the studies that I do, and I discuss them publicly in my Rotary Club or with my customers, none of the people believe anything that I'm saying. There's no problem here. What are you guys talking about? I turn on my faucet and the water comes out. And until the public is actually paying, and I know this has been said, for the price of the water that it actually costs, what we're talking about is going to be met with social architecture resistance. I still think the public needs more education. I don't mean to distract from the gray water subjects. I love them myself, but public impression, it just isn't there. The water comes out of the tap. There's no problem.
I think that's starting to change. Now, I know water's cheap, very cheap in a lot of locations, but somewhere such too cheap, absolutely. But Santa Barbara, $4 something per HCF, $2 something per sewage disposal. Now, if you're building a new house in Santa Barbara, and we get a few builders involved there, we expect an irrigation system will go in for about $1,300 US. That saves $650 per year for the household. So is a house prepared to pay $1,300 to save $600 a year every year beyond that? Yeah, I think it's starting to stack up.
Well, water is way too cheap and sometimes not even metered. Next question.
Yeah, thank you. John Swaffield from Herrick Watt in Scotland. A comment and a question. On the question of public health, there was a documented case in Holland in the last 10 years of a grey water reuse system in a complete block of housing where there was a cross connection. And that then became clear eventually due to the continued illness of the people. And that was written up in a CIBW 62 meeting in Paris in 2004. So that might be of some interest. The other thing which occurs to me is that it's quite right that new commercial buildings should be prepared for grey water use. But I think the elephant that's standing over there in the corner is the fact that we have a lot of old buildings. And as with energy insulation, the real problem is not what we do with new buildings, but what we're going to do with all of the old buildings in the large cities which are going to be water stressed. So I just thought I'd chuck that in as a comment. Thank you.
And that's a good point too. We've found a lot of success in going into the older buildings and in particular tapping into rooftop rainwater, commercial buildings I'm speaking of now. That is almost always very easy to tap into. The condensate is another source that we can tap into as readily as well. So the challenge is how are you going to use that water, certainly for cooling tower makeup, for irrigation. So those are great retrofit sources and uses that we found. It's just when you get to the gray water or when you get to wanting to flush toilets with that reused water where it becomes prohibitively expensive in an older building. But half the projects we do are retrofits.
John, what do you think?
Well, I've heard talk a lot about health and safety, and that's important. But I've not heard any manufacturers who are sitting in the room today stand up and say, what about the quality of the water that you want to put into my system? That's kind of curious because that's been one of their complaints all along is about water quality and what's delivered to my highly sophisticated flushing system or whatever. So that to me speaks that maybe it's not as important to them as what they say outside this room. But that's not my question. My question is, that was a comment. I'd like, especially for you, Mike, because you've compared some of these standards, I'd like to get your perspective on the 3 standards that are either in preparation or completed with respect to gray water treatment. That's NSF 350, CSA 128.3, and IAPMO IGC 207, and how they compare and how they affect you as a manufacturer.
Well, I don't know all the details to answer how to compare them all right off the top of my head, but the number one way they're going to affect manufacturers like myself really is for cost, because it just depends on where the eventual standard ends up on the primarily the filtering quality that has to be done is going to affect the expense it takes to filter to that standard. That's I think our biggest issue is where things are going to eventually fall in place on how fine we got to filter to, and that's a function of costs. I mean, you can always buy a filter that'll filter properly, and then it's a matter of what it costs and how long it'll last before it needs maintenance. So that's how it'll affect us.
I think we take 2 more questions. Go ahead.
I don't mind me the question either, but I'm Joe Harrison with the Water Quality Association. I've worked many years, 20 or more, with Peter Cartwright. But I was asked an interesting question about a year ago from the CEO of Pentair Water, Randy Hogan. He asked me about water reuse, what I thought of water reuse. And I said, Randy, we do it all the time. It's just a matter of economics. Car washes, for example, our industry puts in ultrafilters and membranes, and we can put in UV light or even advanced oxidation, whatever it takes to reuse the water, because the economics for those kind of small businesses are such that it's cheaper for them to reuse that water than it is to dispose of it. But most other individual homes or individual small businesses, the economic incentive is not there. They're not going to spend dollars per 100 gallons to treat their water and reuse it when they can just pump a little more out of their well or get a little more through their water meter for pennies, 100,000 gallons or 100 gallons. And there's not enough motivation from an altruistic or it's the right thing to do standpoint for individual businesses and individuals themselves to do this. Maybe utilities will do it and things like that, but I mean, I think until we get to the point where individuals are realizing the real cost of not reusing the water, and then they'll start paying for the treatment it takes to reuse it. But there's no question, as Peter started out in the beginning, we can do it right today with any of these water supplies. It's just a matter of the driving force economically has to be there, not altruistically, I think.
I know there's one gentleman up front here had a question.
Tony Mobley, City and County of San Francisco, plumbing inspector. This is in response to a question posed by the panel. I believe it was you, John, who said, is there any other municipality that would require the developers to build in the infrastructure for a reuse or a reclaimed water system? And we, in fact, did exactly that in San Francisco. In a prescribed area, we said this is a reclaimed water area. If you want to develop here, you must put a reclaimed waters infrastructure in your building. That was 8 or 9 years ago. There are high rises that have purple pipes, purple backflows, regular backflow, and there is no reclaimed water. Our PUC didn't have the willpower or didn't have the whatever, for whatever reason. So here's this developer that's incurred this enormous cost, went through all the cross-connection testing and continues to test every year his backflow devices, and we've provided him with no infrastructure, no reclaimed water whatsoever. So that would be a good case for him to say, well, then let me take my own gray water inside the building. I already have the plumbing for it. Let me pump it back into my building. But that hasn't occurred.
I'm afraid in the interest of keeping on schedule, we're going to have to end the panel discussion here.